The fork clinked against Mom's best china as my sister Vanessa laughed. Loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. A freelance writer? Come on, Derek. That's not a real career. It's basically a hobby you get paid pennies for. Her voice dripped with that particular brand of condescension she perfected over the years. I sat there, my untouched pasta growing cold, while she smirked across the Sunday lunch table. Dad shifted uncomfortably. Mom pretended to be very interested in the salad bowl. My younger brother Tyler stared at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. Nobody defended me. They never did. Vanessa worked at Preston Global, a massive tech consulting firm downtown, and she never let anyone forget it. Her designer blazer probably cost more than I made in a month, and her diamond earrings caught the afternoon light, streaming through Mom's dining room windows. I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. What was the point? Then I noticed her phone buzzing on the table beside her wine glass. She glanced down at the screen, and her face went completely white. The smirk vanished. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached the phone. What's wrong? Mom asked, noticing Vanessa's sudden change in expression. Vanessa's fingers flew across her phone screen, scrolling frantically. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the panic creeping across her features. Nothing, she said, but her voice cracked on a word. I leaned forward slightly, curious to spite myself. The notification banner on her phone was visible from where I sat. Breaking: Preston Global faces federal investigation for fraud. The news alert expanded as she tapped it, and I caught glimpses of words like insider trading, SEC investigation, and executive arrests. Her fork clattered against her plate as she set her phone down with shaking hands. I need to make a call, she announced, pushing back from the table. But her legs seemed unsteady as she stood. Mom and Dad exchanged worried looks. Tyler finally looked up from his plate, confusion written all over his 14-year-old face. Vanessa grabbed her phone and her designer purse, nearly knocking over her wine glass in process. I'm sorry I have to go. Work emergency. After Vanessa rushed out, I excused myself and went up to my old bedroom, the one Mom still kept exactly as I'd left it when I moved out 5 years ago. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, my hands clenched into fists, and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back at that table. Anger burned in my chest, hot and fierce. Not just about today's insult, but about years of them. Every family gathering where she belittled my choices. Every achievement she dismissed. Every time she made me feel like I was worthless because I didn't fit into her definition of success. My name is Derek Prescott. I'm 28 years old, originally from Columbus, Ohio, and if you're watching this story unfold, please subscribe to my channel for more fascinating stories like this. I pulled out my laptop and started searching for information about Preston Global. The news was everywhere. Federal investigators had been building a case for months. Several senior executives were facing criminal charges. The company's stock had dropped 40% in the last hour, and Vanessa, I knew, worked directly under one of the executives named in the investigation. The next morning, I sat in my small apartment across town, drinking coffee and staring at my computer screen. For 3 years, I'd been writing freelance articles, barely scraping by, constantly defending my choices to everyone who asked what I really did for a living. Nobody understood that I actually loved what I did. Nobody cared that I'd built a small but loyal readership. I was just Derek, the family disappointment who couldn't get a real job. But something had shifted inside me after yesterday's lunch. I opened my contacts list and started scrolling through names I hadn't thought about in years. Former colleagues from my brief stint at a marketing agency, classmates from my journalism degree, editors I'd worked with on small publications, people who actually understood the value of good writing and storytelling. I spent the entire day sending emails, updating my portfolio website, and polishing my best articles. By evening, I'd reconnected with 12 people from my professional network. One of them mentioned a major opportunity coming up, something about a national magazine launching a new digital platform. They're looking for writers who can tell compelling stories, she wrote. You should definitely reach out. 2 weeks later, I walked into another family dinner at Mom's house. Vanessa was already there, looking tired and stressed. The Preston Global scandal had dominated the news cycle. She'd been placed on administrative leave while the company sorted through the investigation. "How's the job hunt going?" she asked me as I sat down, her voice still carrying that edge of superiority despite everything. "Actually, I applied for something interesting," I said casually. She raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Another blog that pays you an exposure." I didn't take the bait. It's with Summit Magazine. They're launching a new investigative journalism platform. Her expression flickered with something I couldn't quite read. "Summit? That's a serious publication. What makes you think they'd hire you?" "Because I'm good at what I do," I replied simply. The words felt foreign in my mouth, but also right. Dad changed the subject to Tyler's basketball game, but I caught Vanessa watching me throughout dinner with a strange look in her eyes. 3 days later, I received an email from Summit Magazine's editorial director. They wanted me to come in for an interview. My hands shook as I typed my response. The Summit Magazine offices occupied 3 floors of a sleek downtown building. I'd spent the entire previous night preparing for my pitch, going over every detail until my eyes burned. This was the biggest opportunity of my career, and I couldn't mess it up. The editorial director, a sharp woman named Patricia Nguyen, led me into a conference room where 4 other editors waited. "Tell us why you're the right person for this platform," she said, settling into her chair. I took a deep breath and launched into my presentation. I talked about the stories I'd covered, the angles I'd found that others missed, the way I could connect with readers on a human level. I showed them samples of my work, explained my research process, and outlined 3 potential story ideas for their new platform. They asked tough questions. I answered them all. An hour later, as I packed up my materials, Patricia smiled. "We have several other candidates to interview, but I'll be honest. You're exactly what we're looking for. We'll be in touch within a week." Outside, I called my best friend Marcus to tell him how it went. "Your sister's going to lose her mind," he laughed. "Good," I said, surprised by the satisfaction in my own voice. The following Sunday, I was having coffee with my Aunt Beatrice when my phone rang. It was Tyler. "Dude, you need to know something," he said, his voice low like he was trying not to be overheard. "Vanessa was asking Mom about your interview at Summit. She seemed really interested in the details." My stomach dropped. "What did Mom tell her?" "Everything you told her. The date, the time, the names of the people you met with." Vanessa wrote it all down. I thanked Tyler and hung up, my mind racing. Of course, she was gathering information. She couldn't stand the idea of me actually succeeding at something. 2 days later, Mom called. Vanessa mentioned that one of her former colleagues from Preston works with someone at Summit Magazine. Small world, isn't it? Her tone was innocent, but I knew what this meant. Vanessa was making calls, probably trying to get inside information about my application. Maybe even trying to sabotage it. But as I sat there, processing this information, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling anxious or defeated, I felt calm. Let her try. Let her use her connections and her arrogance. It would only prove what I already knew. She was so used to being on top that she couldn't imagine losing to her failure of a brother. I doubled down on my preparation. Every morning, I woke up at 5 and spent 2 hours researching, writing, and refining my skills. I read everything I could about investigative journalism, studied the best writers in the field, and practiced my craft relentlessly. Patricia had mentioned during the interview that Summit Magazine was partnering with several major organizations for their new platform. I started looking into those partnerships, try to understand what kind of stories they'd want to tell. That's when I discovered something interesting. One of Summit's main partners was a nonprofit focused on corporate accountability and business ethics. And guess which company they've been quietly investigating for the past 6 months? Preston Global. I stare at my computer screen, pieces clicking into place in my mind. Vanessa had worked at Preston for 5 years. She'd been in meetings, seen documents, heard conversations. She might not have been directly involved in the fraud, but she definitely knew things. Things that would make an incredible story. A story about corporate culture, about how good people can get caught up in bad systems. A story that Summit magazine would absolutely want to publish. 3 weeks after my interview, Patricia called me personally. Derek, we'd like to offer you a position as a staff writer for our investigative platform. Your first assignment, if you accept, will be a deep dive into corporate fraud and accountability. We want someone who can tell the human side of these stories. I accepted immediately, my heart pounding in my chest. She mentioned that they'd be making a public announcement about their new team next week, including profiles of all the writers they'd hired. There will be a small reception, she added. Feel free to bring guests. We want to celebrate our new talent. I knew exactly who I'd be inviting. That evening, I called Mom and asked her to organize a family lunch the following Sunday. What's the occasion? She asked. I have some news to share, I said. When Sunday arrived, everyone gathered around the table again. Vanessa showed up late. As usual, her designer handbag slung over her shoulder. She'd found a new job at a smaller firm, but the Preston scandal had definitely damaged her reputation in the industry. So, what's this big news? She asked, barely looking at me as she reached for the breadbasket. I let the moment stretch out, enjoying the anticipation. I got the job at Summit magazine. I said simply. Mom clapped her hands together. Dad beamed with pride. Tyler gave me a fist bump across the table. Vanessa froze, a piece of bread halfway to her mouth. The staff position? She asked, her voice tight. Staff writer on their new investigative journalism platform. I start next month. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, disbelief, and something that might have been respect before settling on a forced smile. Well, congratulations, she managed to say. That's actually impressive. The qualifier stung, but I let it go. There's more, I continued. Summit is hosting a reception next Friday to introduce the new team. I have plus ones. I'd love for the whole family to come. Vanessa's smile became even more strained. I might have plans that night. It would mean a lot to have everyone there. I pressed gently. Mom jumped in, sensing the tension. We wouldn't miss it for anything, sweetheart. After lunch, as everyone was leaving, I noticed Vanessa lingering by her car. She was on her phone again, her free hand gesturing sharply as she spoke to someone. Her voice carried across the driveway. I need to know who else is on that team. Over the next few days, I started hearing rumors. Small things at first. Questions from mutual acquaintances about my experience, my credentials, whether I was really qualified for such a prestigious position. Then Marcus called me. Your sister's been talking to people, he said bluntly. She's suggesting that you only got the job because Summit needed to fill diversity quotas, or something. She's implying you're not actually qualified. I wasn't surprised, but it still hurt. This was classic Vanessa when she couldn't control something. She tried to diminish it. What should I do? I asked. Nothing. Marcus advised. Let your work speak for itself. She's only doing this because she's scared of you succeeding. He was right, but I wasn't going to do nothing. I was going to do something better. I started documenting everything. Every article I wrote, every piece of positive feedback, every professional connection I made. I created a simple portfolio website showcasing my best work, complete with metrics showing readership and engagement. I reached out to people I'd interviewed, collected testimonials, and built a comprehensive record of my professional achievements. By the end of the week, anyone who searched my name online would find clear evidence of my capabilities. Summit magazine's reception was held at an upscale gallery downtown. I arrived early, my stomach full of nervous butterflies despite my outward calm. Patricia greeted me warmly and introduced me to my new colleagues, a diverse group of talented journalists from various backgrounds. Your piece on community resilience after economic collapse was brilliant. One of them told me, the way you centered the voices of ordinary people instead of just quoting experts, that's exactly what we need more of. We were deep in conversation about storytelling techniques when I saw my family arrive. Mom wore her best dress. Dad had on his good suit. Tyler looked uncomfortable but proud in khakis and a button-down shirt. And Vanessa walked in wearing a power suit that screamed expensive, her head held high like she was a guest of honor instead of me. Patricia noticed my family and came over to meet them. As I introduced everyone, I watched Vanessa's expression carefully. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the elegant space, the successful journalist, the obvious prestige of the event. This was her world, corporate events and networking and professional achievement. Except this time, I was the one being celebrated. Throughout the evening, I moved through the crowd with growing confidence. I introduced myself to editors and journalists whose work I'd admired for years. I discussed story ideas, exchanged contacts, and slowly built connections within my new professional community. What I didn't expect was how many of these people already knew about Vanessa. Preston Global scandal had been huge news in business journalism circles. When I mentioned my sister worked there, several people's expressions changed. "That must have been difficult for your family," one senior editor said sympathetically. The investigation revealed some really troubling patterns in corporate culture. I realized something important in that moment. Vanessa's world was smaller than she believed. Her position at Preston had seemed impressive, but in the broader landscape of meaningful work, it was just another corporate job at a company that prioritized profit over ethics. Meanwhile, I was entering a field where the whole point was to hold people and institutions accountable, to tell stories that mattered, to give voice to truth. I saw Vanessa watching from across the room as I laughed at something Patricia said. Her expression was unreadable, but her champagne glass was gripped so tightly I worried it might shatter. A month into my new position, I published my first major piece for Summit, an investigation into how mid-level employees cope with discovering their company's illegal activities. It went viral, shared thousands of times across social media, and cited by other news outlets. The story focused on regular people caught in impossible situations, forced to choose between their careers and their ethics. I didn't mention Preston Global specifically, but anyone familiar with recent corporate scandals would recognize the parallels. That Sunday, Mom organized another family dinner. This time, when I walked in, the atmosphere was different. Dad pulled me aside immediately. "We saw your article. Son, really powerful stuff." Tyler showed me his phone, where he'd share my piece on all his social media. "Half my teachers read this," he said, grinning. "They said it was college-level journalism." Even Mom, who usually avoided anything too serious, told me she'd read every word. "I didn't realize how hard those situations were for people," she admitted. Vanessa arrived late again, but this time she didn't make a dramatic entrance. She sat down quietly, barely participating in the conversation. When Dad brought my article, suggesting she must have insights from her Preston experience, she changed the subject quickly. "It's just one article," she muttered. But we all knew it wasn't. The success of my first piece led to more assignments, bigger stories, and growing recognition in journalism circles. My editor praised my work publicly in staff meetings. I was invited to speak on a panel about ethical journalism at a local university. My social media following grew from a few hundred to several thousand engaged readers. Vanessa's response was to become more aggressive. At family gatherings, she'd interrupt my stories about work to talk about her new position. Even though everyone could tell her heart wasn't in it, she made pointed comments about real business versus just writing about business. She suggested I was only getting attention because investigative journalism was trendy right now. One evening, I was having dinner with some colleagues when I got a text from Marcus. "Your sister just commented on your latest article. You might want to see this." I pulled up the piece on my phone and scrolled to the comment section. There, under an obvious pseudonym, was a lengthy criticism questioning my research methods, my sources, and my conclusions. The writing style was unmistakable, verbose, defensive, and dripping with superiority. I showed it to my colleague Andrea, who laughed. "Let me guess. Family member who can't handle your success." My sister, I confirmed. "Don't engage," Andrea advised. "Success is the best response." My next major assignment was a profile series on whistleblowers, people who'd expose corporate wrongdoing despite personal and professional costs. I interviewed former employees from various industries, documenting their courage and the price they'd paid for speaking truth. One of my subjects had worked at a company in the same industry as Preston Global. During our interview, She mentioned knowing several people who'd left Preston right before the scandal broke. There was one woman, she recalled, who tried to convince her colleagues to report what they were seeing. But nobody listened. She left the company and tried to warn people, but by then it was too late. Something about that description felt familiar, but I couldn't quite place it. When the profile series published, it received even more attention than my first piece. A major news network reached out about adapting one of the stories for a television segment. Patricia pulled me aside after a staff meeting. "Derek, you're doing exceptional work. We're considering you for a senior writer position. It usually takes years to reach that level, but your impact has been remarkable." I thanked her, trying to keep my expression professional despite wanting to jump and cheer. That weekend, at yet another family lunch, I mentioned the possible promotion casually. Vanessa's fork clattered against her plate. The unexpected ally came from the most surprising source. My Uncle Bernard, Dad's older brother who I barely knew. He'd been mostly absent from family gatherings over the years, having moved to Seattle for work. But he flew in for Thanksgiving and pulled me aside after dinner. "I've been following your work," he said quietly. "Your sister doesn't know this, but I used to work in corporate compliance. I know what happened at Preston Global." He explained that he'd kept in touch with people in the industry, and Vanessa's name had come up in conversations. Not because she'd done anything illegal, but because she'd been willfully blind to warning signs that others had reported. She had opportunities to ask questions, to push back, to at least document her concerns. Bernard told me, but she was too focused on climbing the ladder to risk making waves. He handed me a business card. "If you ever want background information on corporate culture and how good people become complicit, call me. I can't give you anything confidential, but I can help you understand the psychology." This conversation changed something in how I saw Vanessa. She wasn't just mean or competitive. She was scared of being exposed as someone who'd chosen ambition over integrity. The promotion came through in February. Senior writer with my own column and the freedom to choose my investigative topics. Summit Magazine sent out a press release, and within hours, my LinkedIn was flooded with congratulations. Industry publications picked up the news. A journalism podcast invited me for an interview. At 28, I'd achieved a level of professional success that typically took a decade to reach. The same day, I noticed Vanessa's name trending on Twitter. Someone had created a thread comparing my meteoric rise in journalism to her fall from grace at Preston Global. The thread was cruel and unnecessary, but it went viral anyway. I immediately contacted the thread's creator and asked them to take it down. They refused, so I posted my own thread, stating clearly that my success had nothing to do with my sister's challenges, that everyone deserves grace during difficult times, and that I wouldn't tolerate my platform being used to hurt my family. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People praised my integrity and kindness. Several of my colleagues shared my thread with supportive comments. And Vanessa, who I knew was watching all of this unfold, texted me for the first time in months. "Thank you. You didn't have to do that." As my career continued to climb, something strange happened to Vanessa's. Despite finding a decent job at a smaller consulting firm, she couldn't seem to regain her previous confidence. Colleagues at her new company knew about Preston Global. Some of them read my articles about corporate ethics and accountability. At a professional conference, someone apparently asked if she was related to that journalist at Summit who writes about corporate fraud. The comparison was implicit, but devastating. At family gatherings, people started asking me about my work first. Aunts and uncles wanted to know about upcoming articles. Cousins asked for career advice about journalism. Dad proudly showed my latest column to anyone who'd listen. Mom had framed a copy of my first viral article and hung it in the living room. Vanessa would sit through these conversations with a tight smile, occasionally interjecting with comments about her own work that nobody really engaged with. I didn't enjoy her discomfort, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of finally being seen by my family as successful, as capable, as someone whose work mattered. The roles had reversed completely, and we both knew it. The question was how she'd handle this new reality. The opportunity to make my success completely undeniable came in April. Summit Magazine was hosting a major event, a symposium on accountability in American institutions. I was invited to moderate a panel of whistleblowers and former corporate executives who'd implemented ethical reforms. The event would be live-streamed, with major media coverage expected. I was working on my opening remarks when I had an idea. I reached out to Patricia with a proposal. What if we included a segment on redemption and change? What if we featured people who'd been part of problematic systems, but had chosen to acknowledge their role and work toward reform? That's brilliant, Patricia said. Do you have someone in mind? I did, actually, but it was risky. I drafted an email to Vanessa, carefully worded and completely sincere. I'm moderating a panel next month about corporate accountability and culture. We're looking for someone willing to speak honestly about the pressures employees face in toxic systems. You don't have to name Preston specifically, but your perspective could help people understand how good intentions can get compromised. Would you be interested? I hit send before I could second-guess myself. 3 days later, she responded, I'll think about it. Another week passed. Then, yes, but I need to be honest, really honest. Are you sure Summit would want that? Vanessa's segment at the symposium was scheduled for the afternoon session. I'd seen her presentation notes. She was planning to talk about the psychological mechanisms that keep people silent when they witness wrongdoing, using her Preston experience as a case study. The morning of the event, she showed up at my apartment at 7. I'm freaking out, she admitted, looking more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. What if people think I'm just trying to rebuild my reputation? What if they don't believe I'm sincere? Are you sincere? I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. Yes, I've spent the last year thinking about who I was at Preston, who I've been my whole life, always competing, always putting others down to feel better about myself, always choosing status over substance. She looked at me directly. I was horrible to you, Derek, for years, because you chose something you loved over something that looked impressive, and I couldn't understand it. Or maybe I could, and that scared me. We talked for 2 hours, the longest real conversation we'd had since we were kids. By the time we left for the symposium, something had shifted between us. Not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of understanding. The symposium was a massive success. Over 1,000 people attended in person, with tens of thousands watching the live stream. My panel went smoothly, with powerful testimonies from people who'd sacrificed everything to expose wrongdoing. Then came Vanessa's segment. I introduced her simply as someone with first-hand experience navigating corporate culture and ethical dilemmas. She stepped up to the microphone, took a deep breath, and began speaking. She talked about the small compromises that led to bigger ones, about the rationalization that everyone does it, and this is just how business works, about the fear of being labeled difficult or not a team player. She spoke about watching junior employees raise concerns and being told to stay in their lane, about performance reviews that rewarded results regardless of methods, and finally, about the moment she realized she'd become complicit in a system she knew was wrong. The audience was completely silent. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. During the Q&A, someone asked, "What would you tell your younger self?" Vanessa's eyes found mine in the crowd. I'd tell her that making your little brother feel small doesn't make you big. That real success is measured by integrity, not salary. That it's okay to choose passion over prestige. The following Sunday, Mom didn't organize a family lunch. I did. I invited everyone to a restaurant downtown, my treat. When we were all seated, I raised my glass. I want to say something. I began. For years, I felt like the family disappointment, the one who couldn't figure out how to be successful the right way. And honestly, that hurt. I looked at each of them, Mom, Dad, Tyler, and Vanessa. But it also taught me something important. It taught me that I needed to define success for myself, not by anyone else's standards. And that lesson has made all the difference. I turned to Vanessa specifically. I know we've had our struggles, but watching you speak at the symposium, seeing you choose honesty over image, that took real courage. More courage than I had to show when I was just trying to prove you wrong. She blinked rapidly, and I realized she was fighting tears. I spent so much energy making you feel bad about your choices, she said softly, when really, you were brave enough to do what I was too scared to try. actually caring about the work itself. The conversation that followed was different from any family discussion we'd had before. Real, honest, vulnerable. Dad admitted he'd put too much emphasis on traditional markers of success. Mom acknowledged she'd enable Vanessa's behavior by always taking her side. Just when I thought we'd reach a resolution, Vanessa pulled out her phone. "There's something else," she said. "I need to show you this." She opened her email and turned the screen toward me. It was a message from a national news network asking if she'd be interested in consulting on a documentary series about corporate ethics. They'd seen her symposium presentation and wanted her expertise. "They found me because of your event," she said. "Because you gave me a platform when you had every reason not to." But there was more. She scrolled to another email, this one from a nonprofit organization focused on corporate whistleblower protection. They wanted her to join their advisory board, helping to create support systems for employees facing ethical dilemmas. "I don't deserve these opportunities," she said quietly. "Yes, you do," I replied. "You're choosing to use your experience to help others. That's exactly what you should be doing." She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Genuine respect. "How did you become the bigger person here?" "I was awful to you." "Because someone had to be," I said, "and I decided it might as well be me." The table fell silent. Then Tyler spoke up. "This is way deeper than I expected from a family lunch. Can we order appetizers now?" We all laughed, the tension breaking, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were actually a family. 6 months later, I stood in Summit Magazine's conference room, looking out over the city. My second major award sat on my desk, recognition for investigative journalism that created real social impact. My column had helped change corporate policies at 3 major companies. 2 of my articles had been cited in congressional hearings about business regulation. Vanessa had launched a consulting practice focused on ethical corporate culture. She worked with companies to create systems that protected employees who raised concerns. She spoke at conferences, wrote op-eds, and slowly rebuilt her reputation, this time based on substance rather than status. We met for coffee every few weeks now, sometimes talking about work, sometimes about family, sometimes about nothing important at all. The relationship wasn't perfect, but it was real. At the most recent family dinner, as I watched my parents beam with pride over both their children's work, as Tyler talked about wanting to study journalism in college, as Vanessa and I exchanged a look of mutual understanding across the table, I realized something important. The victory wasn't just about proving her wrong or proving myself right. It was about both of us finding our way to work that mattered, to versions of ourselves we could respect. I'd entered that first family lunch feeling invisible and defeated. I left this one feeling seen, valued, and genuinely proud, not just of what I'd achieved, but of who I'd become in the process. The family dynamics had changed forever, but this time the change felt like growth.